You know that time of year when we all gather around for some good food and gratitude? But hey, before we go into another round of turkey and stuffing, let's take a second to peek behind the curtain. Because, believe it or not, there's more to this holiday than meets the eye. Today, we'll bust Thanksgiving myths, clarify half-truths, explore English and Wampanoag property beliefs, and unveil hidden truths. Ever stop to think about the real deal behind the festivities? Wondered why some parts of the story seem a bit fuzzy? Stay till the end, because we're about to shed light on the sad realities obscured by centuries of celebration. You know, the story behind the first Thanksgiving isn't as simple as we've been led to believe. It wasn't just a friendly get-together. There were massacres, sickness, and a whole lot of cooperation among Native American tribes that played a big role. Yet, in schools across the country, kids still dress up with fake feathers and hats, acting out what they've been taught about Thanksgiving. But it turns out, a lot of what we think we know isn't accurate. David Silverman, in his new book, This Land is Their Land, explains how many of these stories are full of mistakes. And you know what? Believing these wrong stories doesn't get the history wrong. It hurts the Wampanoag tribe. How deeply were the lives and communities to the Wampanoag tribe impacted when English settlers arrived in Plymouth? So, according to Silverman's book, it's all about the Wampanoag, right? Well, let's see. When those pilgrims rocked up in 1620, Osamequin, the Wampanoag chief, thought he struck a deal to keep his people safe from other tribes. Now, over the next half-century, those settlers just couldn't get enough land. Diseases started spreading like wildfire, and they sucked the Wampanoag dry of their resources. Cue the dramatic entrance of King Philip's War. Spoiler alert, it was a disaster for the Wampanoag, and it shifted the power balance in favor of the European settlers. Today, the Wampanoag aren't exactly hosting a celebration for the pilgrims' arrival. No, it's more like a day of mourning, not the joyous feast Thanksgiving would have us believe. So we caught up with Silverman, the history buff from George Washington University, to get the lowdown on his book and all the eye-opening revelations it brings. You might wonder how they got pulled into the story. After talking with some Wampanoag people, it became pronounced, Thanksgiving? Not exactly their favorite holiday, especially for the kids. Back in their school days, they were practically invisible during Thanksgiving, forced to sit through lectures filled with fairy tales instead of facts. It was like their history was being butchered right before their eyes. And let's not even go into how society just seemed to ignore their past struggles like they were nothing. So, what's the deal with the Thanksgiving myth, you ask? Well, it goes a little something like this. These vague, kind Native Americans, who conveniently belong to no specific tribe, welcome the pilgrims with open arms in America. They teach them the ropes, share a meal, and then poof, disappear into thin air. They hand America over to the white people on a silver platter so they can build a powerhouse nation all about freedom, opportunity, and Christianity. That's the story. It's all about Native people rolling over for colonialism. And it just ignores all the fighting, like it's not even important in the story of white people taking over the land. Wondering about the inaccuracies of this story? Let's clear things up. Some people think Native American history only began when Europeans arrived. But the truth is, Native people have been here for ages, long before the Europeans showed up. And while everyone talks about the Mayflower, the Wampanoag tribe had been dealing with European stuff for 100 years before that. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There was a ton of violence and enslavement. And before the Pilgrims came, some Wampanoags already spoke English and had met Europeans. Using a cozy meal to represent colonialism? Yeah, not quite right. It was more like Wampanoag leader Osamequin trying to protect his people from other tribes after they got hit hard by diseases. But hey, who needs accuracy, right? Well, there's more to the story, and it's worth knowing. Be the first to know about our upcoming content. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now let's proceed with the rest of the real Thanksgiving story. How did we end up with the whole great dinner becoming the star of Thanksgiving? Well, back in the day, the English had a different way of doing Thanksgiving. They were all about prayer and fasting instead of stuffing their faces. But then, in 1769, some descendants of the Pilgrim over in Plymouth started feeling a bit left out of the history books. They wanted to boost tourism, so they cooked up the idea that the Pilgrims were the founders of America. And what happened next? The story took off when Reverend Alexander Young mentioned a big dinner in a publication and labeled it the First Thanksgiving. Suddenly, everyone was all ears, and it became the go-to version of the story. Even good old Abraham Lincoln jumped on board during the Civil War, making it an official holiday to help bring people together. Back in the late 1800s, when people were getting nervous about immigrants, this old story made a comeback. The old-school white Protestants weren't too keen on the new Catholics and Jews moving in. They figured, hey, let's show them how awesome our way of life is. Cue the big fuss about Pilgrims and Native Americans sharing grub. 'Cause nothing says superiority like a hearty meal, right? Also, don't forget, tossing in some Native Americans seems like a swell idea as the Indian Wars wrapped up. But you know, let's conveniently ignore all the violence out west. Oh, and Reconstruction? Perfect time to pat ourselves on the back for our colonial past while ignoring the not-so-great stuff like slavery and battles with Native Americans. How did the English and Wampanoags see the land? While some people think Native Americans didn't give a hoot about owning land, the Wampanoags had a pretty tight grip on their turf, even if they didn't have fences with keep out signs. When the Europeans showed up and started buying land, the Wampanoags were like, sure, come. Little did they know, the English thought they were scaring the whole deal. Talk about a major misunderstanding. Cue King Philip's War, where the Wampanoags fought tooth and nail to keep their land and freedom. But guess what happened? Not every Wampanoag was on board with Chief Osamequin's buddy-buddy act with the English. Some were like, let's team up with the Narragansetts and kick these colonizers out. We can't blame them considering the English had a habit of raiding and snatching people up as slaves. And the diseases they brought. It was a mess. Amidst all this trauma, tribal politics were the main show, overshadowing any beef with the colonizers. Because it's all about looking out for your tribe first, even if it means making deals with the enemy. The perspective on these events differs from others, especially regarding King Philip's War. The question arises, were Native Americans, led by Metacomet or Philip, believed to be planning a rebellion against the English? It is strongly believed they were. Despite dissent from some historians, evidence has been found from English settlers living near Wampanoag tribes who were genuinely scared by what they saw. They observed native leaders, not always in agreement, convening multiple meetings. Too many, it's clear. Even if this evidence is ignored, it is evident that native people were at their breaking point. They understood that if swift action was not taken, all their land would be lost and they would come under English control. This challenges the Thanksgiving story completely. It is believed that it is important to teach children the real reasons behind Native people's actions, instead of the false idea that they willingly gave up their land. Believing in such lies hurts Native Americans and makes white Americans less aware of their privilege. If we learn to see through the lies of colonialism, we'll be better at recognizing and opposing modern-day colonialism and imperialism. To sum up, the story of Thanksgiving hides a sad past of taking land, kicking people out, and hurting Native Americans. But by uncovering this story and facing the sad truth, we can start to see the unfairness still hurting Native American groups today. From now on, we need to focus on what Native Americans had to say about Thanksgiving and our history together. We need to make sure everyone's included and we understand what happened. Then, we can truly show thanks and try to make things right. Hey people, are you satisfied with our content? Your feedback is important, so share your thoughts in the comments